Hello again, my fellow night owls. It's that time when we cozy up with our favorite snacks and drinks. Let's journey back in time, hoping to catch that spark of love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now, where were we? Ah yes, the duel. Enough, Isabelle shouted, her voice filled with a mix of anger and desperation. I won't let you two fight over me. This is not what I wanted. Waverly's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, something akin to regret flickered in his eyes. You think you can walk away from this unscathed? The world will not allow it. Isabelle took a step back, her heart racing. I refuse to be a pawn in your game, Waverly. You can't control me anymore. His eyes narrowed, a flash of rage crossing his face. You'll regret those words, Isabelle. Mark my words. You'll wish you had accepted my offer. As he turned to leave, Isabelle felt a surge of fear wash over her. The stakes were higher than ever, and she could feel the pressure building around her. Isabelle, Alexander said softly, stepping closer to her, his expression filled with concern. Are you okay? She nodded, though doubt gnawed at her insides. I don't know what to do anymore. He took her hands, his gaze earnest. Whatever you choose, I'll be by your side. You don't have to face this alone. The sincerity in his words brought her a flicker of hope, but the reality of the situation loomed over her like a dark cloud. She knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time she felt a sense of purpose in her decision. Then let's face it together, she declared, her voice steady. I choose love, no matter the cost. Alexander's face lit up with a mixture of relief and pride. You're brave, Isabelle. Together we can weather any storm. As they stood in the moonlit garden, hands intertwined, Isabelle knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it as one. The whispers of society would never define her. She would carve her own path, guided by love and courage. Chapter 6: The Reckoning. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty as Isabelle and Alexander faced the consequences of their choice. The scandal surrounding their relationship began to spread like wildfire, and whispers turned into outright gossip. At the next gathering, the atmosphere was tense, charged with the knowledge of their defiance. Isabelle entered the grand hall with Alexander by her side, and immediately the room fell silent. All eyes turned to them, judgment etched on every face. Waverly stood across the room, a smug expression on his face, clearly reveling in the attention. Ah, the lovebirds, he called out, a mocking tone lacing his words. Isn't it heartwarming to see young lovers defy societal norms? Isabelle felt the heat of embarrassment flood her cheeks, but she refused to look away. You don't scare me, Waverly, she declared, her voice steady despite the weight of scrutiny bearing down on her. He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. You should be scared, my dear. I have the power to ruin you both. Your threats mean nothing to me, Alexander interjected, standing protectively in front of Isabelle. You're just a man who hides behind your privilege and tries to bully others into submission. Waverly's smile faltered for a moment, surprise flickering in his eyes. How noble of you, Alexander. But let's not forget who holds the cards here. Isabelle's future depends on my goodwill. Or perhaps her future depends on her own choices, Isabelle shot back, the fire of her determination igniting. I refuse to be a pawn in your game. The tension in the room grew thick as Waverly regarded her with a mixture of admiration and disdain. You may think you're brave, but the truth is this scandal will follow you forever. No decent man will want you now. Perhaps I don't need a decent man, Isabelle replied, her chin lifted defiantly. I'd rather have someone who values me for who I am, not for my title or wealth. Alexander's heart swelled with pride as he watched her stand up for herself. And I'll always value you, Isabelle. You deserve to be loved, not possessed. The room erupted with murmurs, the crowd captivated by the unfolding drama. Waverly's face darkened, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You'll regret this, Isabelle, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Mark my words. Then bring it on, she replied, her heart racing with exhilaration. I'm ready for whatever you throw at us. As Waverly turned to leave, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd, once captivated by the drama, now buzzed with the electricity of rebellion. Isabelle felt a wave of empowerment wash over her. She had stood her ground and refused to be intimidated. But as the night wore on, the repercussions of their choices began to sink in. Despite her bravado, doubt crept in. What would happen next? How would they navigate the fallout from their scandalous affair? Days turned into weeks, and the whispers persisted. Isabelle found herself at the center of conversations that should have been joyous, the weight of society's judgment pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. One evening, as she sat with her family, the tension in the air was palpable. Her mother's expression was filled with concern as she broached the topic. "Isabelle, dear, we need to discuss your future," her mother said gently, her tone cautious. Isabelle felt her heart race, dread pooling in her stomach. "What about my future?" "Your reputation is in shambles," her mother continued, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "Waverly has been spreading rumors, and it's damaging your chances of a good match. You must reconsider your association with Lord Hawthorne." Isabelle's heart sank, but she refused to back down. "I will not let Waverly dictate my choices. I love Alexander." Her mother's eyes widened in shock. "Love is not enough, Isabelle. You must think of your family and your future." "What future?" Isabelle shot back, her frustration bubbling over. "A future where I'm forced to marry a man I don't love? I refuse to live a life dictated by others." "Isabelle," her father interjected, his voice firm yet gentle. "We only want what's best for you. Society has its rules for a reason." "Society's rules are outdated," she argued, her heart pounding. "I won't live a life of regret, trapped in a gilded cage." Her parents exchanged glances, and for a moment, silence reigned. Isabelle felt a wave of vulnerability wash over her. She was fighting for her freedom, but the burden of tradition weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Isabelle," her mother finally said, her voice softer, "we love you, and we want you to be happy, but you must consider the consequences of your actions. You may lose everything you hold dear." "I'll take that risk," she replied fiercely, determination flooding her voice. "I'd rather fight for what I want than live a life of misery." The conversation ended, but the tension lingered. Isabelle knew she was at a crossroads, faced with the choice between love and societal expectations. She felt the weight of her family's disappointment, but she also felt the fire of her convictions burning brighter. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought of Alexander. The way he looked at her, the warmth of his embrace, the passion of their stolen moments, they filled her with a sense of purpose. She couldn't let fear dictate her life. Chapter 7: The Turning Point. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotion and chaos. Isabelle and Alexander continued to defy societal norms, stealing moments together despite the growing scrutiny from those around them. The pressure was mounting, but so was their determination. One evening, as they strolled through the gardens, hand in hand, Isabelle paused to gaze at the stars twinkling above them. "Do you think we can really make this work?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. Alexander turned to her, his expression serious. "I believe we can. Love is worth fighting for, Isabelle. We just must be brave enough to face the consequences together." She felt a surge of warmth at his words, the way he believed in them both fueling her resolve. "What if Waverly tries to ruin us? What if we lose everything?" "Then we'll face it head on," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "We won't let anyone dictate our happiness. I promise to stand by you." As they spoke, a rustling sound interrupted their moment. Suddenly, Waverly emerged from the shadows, his expression twisted into a smirk. Well, what a charming little rendezvous," he mocked, his eyes glinting with malice. "What do you want, Waverly?" Isabelle snapped, her heart racing at the sight of him. "I came to deliver a message," he said, taking a step closer. "You see, your little romance has caused quite a stir in society, and I have no intention of letting it go unnoticed." "What are you planning?" Alexander interjected, his voice low and threatening. Waverly chuckled, a dark glimmer in his eyes. "Let's just say I have a few tricks up my sleeve. If you continue to defy me, I'll ensure that your precious reputation is dragged through the mud." Isabelle felt a wave of dread wash over her. "You can't control us, Waverly. We won't be intimidated." "Ah, but you misunderstand," he replied, a predatory smile on his face. "I don't need to control you. I just need to let society do it for me. And trust me, they'll turn against you before you even realize it." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Isabelle and Alexander reeling. The threat hung heavy in the air, and doubt crept in like an unwelcome intruder. "I won't let him win," Isabelle said, determination rising within her. "We'll find a way to combat this." Together, Alexander affirmed, taking her hands in his, we'll face whatever comes our way. But as the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere around them shifted. The whispers grew louder, the judgment more palpable. Invitations to social events dwindled, and the isolation began to take its toll. One afternoon, as Isabelle sat in her drawing room, her mother entered with a grave expression. "Isabelle, dear, we need to talk." "About what?" she asked, her heart racing. "It's about your engagement to Lord Waverley," her mother began, her voice heavy. "He has made it clear that he's willing to overlook your indiscretions if you agree to marry him." Isabelle felt her stomach drop. "I won't marry him, Mother. I'd rather face the consequences of my choices than be trapped in a loveless marriage." Her mother's gaze softened, a mix of concern and love etched on her face. "But what about your future? What about your happiness?" "My happiness lies with Alexander, not Waverley," Isabelle replied fiercely, her heart racing. "I will not let fear dictate my choices." Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples as if battling an internal conflict. "Just remember, Isabelle, love does not always conquer all. Society can be unforgiving." "I understand, Mother," she said, her voice steady, "but I have to be true to myself." As the weeks progressed, Isabelle found herself torn between the expectations of her family and the love she felt for Alexander. Each day brought new challenges, but she refused to back down. Chapter 8. The Final Showdown. As the summer ball approached, tensions reached a boiling point. Isabelle and Alexander were determined to confront Waverley and put an end to his threats once and for all. The evening of the ball arrived, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. As Isabelle entered the grand hall, she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. The whispers followed her like shadows, but she held her head high, refusing to let them dim her spirit. Alexander was by her side, a pillar of strength as they navigated the crowded room. But in the distance, Waverley stood, watching them with a calculated gaze. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked, his voice low. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking a deep breath. "We need to confront him." With determination fueling their steps, they approached Waverley, who regarded them with a sly smile. "Ah, the star-crossed lovers," he drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. "How delightful to see you together." "Enough of the games, Waverley," Alexander said, his voice steady. "We're not here to play your little charades." Waverley raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Oh, but I assure you, I have no intention of playing. I simply want what's best for our dear Isabelle." Isabelle felt her blood boil at his words. "You don't care about me, Waverley. You care about power and control. I refuse to be a pawn in your game." His smile faded, replaced by a cold glare. "You think you're so brave, don't you? But trust me, society will turn against you. You're already a laughingstock." "Let them laugh," Isabelle shot back, her voice unwavering. "I would rather be true to myself than live a lie." Waverley's expression twisted into a sneer. "You're a fool if you think this will end well for you. I'll make sure of it." In that moment, Isabelle felt a surge of clarity. "Do your worst, Waverley. You can't break us. Love is stronger than your petty threats." Alexander's grip tightened on her hand, his gaze filled with admiration. "And we'll face whatever comes together." With that, Waverley stepped back, his expression dark and furious. "You'll regret this, both of you. I won't let you walk away unscathed." As he turned to leave, the room erupted into a buzz of conversation, the air thick with tension. Isabelle felt a wave of adrenaline coursing through her, a sense of empowerment that fueled her resolve. The evening wore on, and despite the storm brewing around them, Isabelle and Alexander danced together, lost in their own world. The music surrounded them, lifting their spirits even as the darkness loomed. As the night drew to a close, Isabelle found herself standing on the balcony, the cool night air refreshing against her skin. Alexander joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We did it," he said, a mixture of disbelief and pride in his voice. "We confronted him," Isabelle replied, her heart racing. "But what happens now?" "Now we prepare for whatever Waverley throws our way," he said, determination etched on his face. "But we'll do it together." In that moment, Isabelle felt a surge of hope. Despite the challenges that lay ahead, they had taken a stand for their love. They were no longer bound by the expectations of others, and for the first time she felt free. Chapter 9. A New Beginning. In the weeks that followed, Waverley's threats intensified, but Isabelle and Alexander remained resolute. The support of their friends grew stronger, bolstered by the courage they had shown in standing against Waverley's tyranny. As they navigated the turbulent waters of scandal and gossip, Isabelle found strength in her choices. The whispers grew quieter as their defiance resonated within their social circle, inspiring others to embrace their own truths. At a gathering hosted by Lady Grantham, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. As Isabelle entered the room, she felt a sense of unity among the guests. Many had rallied behind her, offering their support and solidarity. "Isabelle," one lady called out, her voice filled with warmth. "We stand with you against Waverley's tyranny." Isabelle's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, your support means the world to me." As the evening progressed, conversations shifted, and the focus turned to empowerment and love. The guests openly discussed their own experiences of defiance against societal expectations, and the atmosphere became a celebration of courage. Amidst the laughter and camaraderie, Waverley's shadow loomed, but the power he once held began to dissipate. Isabelle felt the tide turning, the momentum shifting in their favor. Later in the evening, Alexander pulled Isabelle aside, his expression serious. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "What is it?" she asked, sensing the weight behind his words. "I've been thinking about our future," he began, taking her hands in his, "and I want you to know that I'm ready to fight for it, whatever it takes." Her heart raced at his words, the warmth of his conviction igniting something deep within her. "I want that too, Alexander. I want a future with you, no matter the cost." He smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then let's make it happen. We'll show Waverley that love conquers all, and we won't be silenced." As they stood together, hand in hand, Isabelle felt a surge of determination. The path ahead was uncertain, but she knew they would face it together, unyielding in their commitment to each other. The final confrontation loomed, but they were ready to embrace the challenge. Their love had grown stronger through the trials they faced, and nothing could extinguish the fire that burned within them. As the evening came to a close, Isabelle looked out at the crowd of friends and supporters, feeling a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She was no longer alone. She had a community that embraced her for who she truly was. And as she stood there, hand in hand with Alexander, she knew they would face whatever came their way, united in love and purpose. Chapter 10. The Resolution. The final confrontation with Waverley came sooner than expected. Word spread that he had made plans to tarnish Isabelle's reputation even further, and she knew they had to act quickly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Isabelle and Alexander gathered their closest friends for support. In the midst of the gathering, they devised a plan to confront Waverley publicly, to stand united against his threats once and for all. The next evening, the grand ballroom of the estate was filled with guests, the air thick with anticipation. Isabelle stood at the center, her heart racing as she prepared to address the crowd. Alexander stood beside her, a reassuring presence as he held her hand tightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabelle began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I stand before you not just as Isabelle, but as a woman who refuses to be silenced." The room fell silent, all eyes on her as she continued. "For too long, I have been subjected to the whims of society and the threats of a man who seeks to control me. But I am here to tell you that I will not be a pawn in anyone's game." As she spoke, the energy in the room shifted. The guests leaned in, captivated by her words. "I choose love. I choose to follow my heart, regardless of the expectations placed upon me." With a deep breath, she glanced at Alexander, drawing strength from his unwavering gaze. "I choose Alexander, a man who sees me for who I truly am. Together, we stand against the oppression of societal norms, and we invite you all to join us in embracing the power of love." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd, and Isabelle felt her confidence surge. "We must not allow fear to dictate our choices. Let us create a future where love triumphs over societal constraints." As she finished, the room erupted into applause, the sound echoing off the walls. Isabelle's heart swelled with gratitude and joy, knowing she was no longer alone in her fight. But then, from the back of the room, Waverley stepped forward, his expression dark and threatening. "How touching," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "But you've made a grave mistake, Isabelle. You think you can defy me and come out unscathed?" Isabelle met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I'm not afraid of you, Waverly. Your power is nothing compared to the strength of love and community." His eyes narrowed, fury boiling beneath the surface. "You'll regret this. I will ensure you pay for your insolence." "Do your worst," Alexander challenged, stepping forward to stand beside Isabelle. "We are not afraid of you, Waverly. You cannot control our happiness any longer." The tension in the room reached its peak as the crowd held its breath, waiting for Waverly's next move. But instead of retreating, he laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the hall. "You think this is over? You have no idea what I'm capable of." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a wave of uncertainty in his wake. Isabelle's heart raced, the reality of their situation sinking in. "What does he mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's bluffing," Alexander replied, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "We've stood up to him, and now he's trying to intimidate us." The evening wore on, but the weight of Waverly's threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Despite the support from their friends, Isabelle felt a sense of foreboding creep in. Chapter 11. The Showdown. As the days turned into weeks, the tension continued to build. Waverly's absence had left a void, but the threat of his return loomed heavily over Isabelle and Alexander. They knew they had to prepare for whatever he had planned. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens, Isabelle and Alexander discussed their strategy. "We need to confront him again, to show that we won't back down," Alexander said, determination etched on his face. "Agreed," Isabelle replied, her heart racing at the thought of facing Waverly again. "But we must be careful. He's dangerous." As they spoke, they heard a commotion nearby. Rushing toward the source of the noise, they stumbled upon a gathering of their friends who were deep in conversation. "What's happening?" Isabelle asked, her heart pounding. "Waverly has been spreading rumors about you," one of her friends replied, her voice filled with concern. "He's claiming you're unfit for society and that your actions are shameful." Isabelle felt a wave of anger wash over her. "He thinks he can intimidate me with his lies. I won't let him." With resolve igniting within her, she turned to Alexander. "We need to face him. It's time to put an end to this once and for all." The following evening, they organized a meeting at Lady Grantham's estate, inviting their closest friends and supporters to join them in their stand against Waverly. The room was filled with tension as everyone gathered, all eyes on Isabelle and Alexander. "I won't allow Waverly to control my narrative any longer," Isabelle declared, her voice steady. "We must confront him publicly, show everyone that his threats are nothing but empty words." "Together we'll stand strong," Alexander added, his gaze fierce. "We won't allow fear to dictate our lives." As the evening wore on, they strategized, determined to gather evidence against Waverly's claims and rally support from their friends. Isabelle felt a sense of unity among them, a bond that strengthened her resolve. The next day, they put their plan into action. With a group of allies by their side, they approached Waverly, who was deep in conversation at a social gathering. The tension in the air was palpable as Isabelle stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Waverly," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We need to talk." He turned to face her, surprise flickering in his eyes before a smirk crossed his face. "Ah, Isabelle, the defiant one, what do you want?" "I want you to stop spreading your lies," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "Your threats won't work on me anymore." His expression darkened, and he leaned in closer. "You think you can intimidate me? You've made a grave mistake, Isabelle." "I'm not afraid of you," she declared, her voice rising. "Your power over me is over. I refuse to live in fear." As she spoke, their friends began to gather around, forming a protective circle around her. The atmosphere shifted, the energy in the room crackling with tension. "You think your little band of supporters can shield you from me?" Waverly sneered, but his bravado wavered as he took in the determination surrounding Isabelle. "I don't need protection," she retorted, her heart racing. "I have the truth on my side. Your lies can't touch me." Waverly's expression twisted into a sneer, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You'll regret this, Isabelle. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Then let's find out, Alexander challenged, stepping forward. We're ready for whatever you throw our way. With that, Waverly took a step back, his facade cracking. You may have the upper hand now, but mark my words, this isn't over. As he turned to leave, Isabelle felt a sense of victory wash over her. They had confronted Waverly, and the tide was beginning to turn in their favor. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. In the days following their confrontation with Waverly, Isabelle and Alexander began to notice a shift in their social circle. Whispers of support replaced the judgment, and the community rallied around them, rejecting Waverly's malicious claims. As they navigated this new chapter, Isabelle felt a sense of empowerment blossom within her. The fear that had once held her captive was slowly dissipating, replaced by the strength of her convictions. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park, Isabelle turned to Alexander, a smile lighting up her face. I can't believe how much has changed in such a short time. I know, he replied, his eyes warm. The community has rallied behind us, and Waverly's influence is fading. People are beginning to see him for what he truly is. Isabelle felt a sense of relief wash over her. It feels good to be free from the weight of his threats. I never realized how stifling it was until now. Together, we've shown that love can conquer fear, Alexander said, his gaze unwavering. And we'll continue to fight for that love, no matter what comes next. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Isabelle felt more secure in her choices. The support of her friends bolstered her confidence, and the whispers of disdain that once plagued her began to fade into the background. One evening, as they gathered at Lady Grantham's estate for a celebratory dinner, Isabelle felt a sense of belonging that filled her heart with joy. As she looked around the room, she saw familiar faces, all smiling and filled with camaraderie. Tonight, we celebrate not just love, but the strength of our community, Lady Grantham announced, raising her glass. To Isabelle and Alexander, for showing us all what it means to stand firm in our beliefs. As the guests raised their glasses in a toast, Isabelle felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. The journey had not been easy, but it had brought her closer to those who truly mattered. Later that evening, as they stood outside under a blanket of stars, Alexander turned to her, his expression serious. Isabelle, there's something I need to ask you. What is it? She asked, her heart racing with anticipation. He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Isabelle felt a rush of emotions, joy, and love intertwining within her. Yes, 1,000 times yes, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. As they embraced, the world around them faded away. In that moment, Isabelle knew that love had triumphed over adversity. They had faced the storm together, and now they stood united, ready to embrace the future. Chapter 13. The Hidden Engagement. The wind howled outside Ravenhall Manor, its mournful cries rattling the window panes of the grand estate. Inside, the warmth of the manor's hearths did little to soothe the chill that had settled in Isabelle's heart. It had been days since her engagement to Alexander, days that should have been filled with bliss and celebration. But instead, a creeping tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Isabelle sat alone in her chambers, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the vanity. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and drawn. The joy that had filled her only a week ago had been replaced with doubt. There had been whispers among the servants all morning, whispers about Lady Evelyn's arrival at the estate. Evelyn, the striking woman who had swept into the manor like a storm, all elegance and ice. Evelyn had found Isabelle in the drawing room, her smile as sharp as the blade of a knife. Without a preamble, she had spoken words that shattered Isabelle's world. Before you, there was me, Evelyn had said, her voice cold and clipped. We were promised to one another. Alexander is, by every law and custom, still my fiancé. Isabelle had stood frozen, the weight of Evelyn's words crashing down upon her. An engagement? Between Alexander and her? The very idea felt like a betrayal. Isabelle had fought the urge to run, to escape the suffocating presence of the woman standing before her. But instead, she had faced her, forcing herself to remain calm, despite the storm raging inside. Now, alone in her chambers, the weight of that moment pressed down on her like a heavy stone. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning with questions. Why hadn't Alexander told her? How could he have kept something so important from her? There was a knock at the door. Soft but insistent. Isabelle knew who it was before he even entered. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself as the door creaked open. Alexander stepped inside, his expression a mixture of guilt and regret. His usually confident stride faltered as he approached her, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. Isabelle didn't turn to face him. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the vanity, her hands clutching the sides as if they could anchor her to the moment. "Isabelle," Alexander began, his voice low and filled with remorse. "Please, let me explain." Her heart clenched at the sound of his voice, but she remained silent, waiting. She wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure how to voice the turmoil inside her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it true?" she asked, her throat tight. "Were you engaged to her?" Alexander stiffened at the question, his jaw tightening. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, Isabelle thought he might not answer. But then, in a voice that was strained with emotion, he replied. "Yes," he admitted, stepping closer. "But it's not what you think. It was years ago, Isabelle. A meaningless arrangement made between our families. I never loved her." Isabelle's heart sank at the confirmation, her worst fears realized. She turned to face him, her eyes wide with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why did I have to hear it from her?" Alexander moved toward her, his hands reaching out as if to comfort her, but she stepped back, her body stiff with anger. "I thought it was in the past," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "I thought it didn't matter anymore. I never thought she would come back like this. Never thought she would try to enforce the engagement." Isabelle stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "Didn't matter?" she repeated, her voice rising. "Of course it matters. You were promised to another woman, Alexander. How could you keep that from me?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "It was a formality," he said, his voice tight. "Something arranged when I was barely old enough to understand what it meant. My family wanted an alliance with hers, but I never cared about it. And after I met you, Isabelle, you are the only one I've ever loved." His words struck her like a physical blow, and she turned away, trying to calm the turmoil inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the love they had shared. But how could she, when he had kept something so significant from her? "And now?" Isabelle asked, her voice quiet. "What happens now? Does she still have a claim on you?" Alexander's face darkened. "Evelyn thinks she can force me into this marriage," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Her family holds power, and she's using that to try and trap me. But I won't let her." Isabelle swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "But you didn't tell me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me." "I was trying to protect you," Alexander said, his voice desperate. "I didn't want to burden you with something that I thought was dead and buried." Isabelle turned to face him, her eyes filled with pain. "But it wasn't dead and buried, was it? She's here now, and she thinks she still has a claim on you." Alexander took her hands, his grip firm but gentle. "I will end this, Isabelle. I swear it. I'll break the engagement once and for all, no matter what it takes." But Isabelle pulled her hands free, her heart aching with doubt. "And what if you can't?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if her family won't let you?" For a long moment there was silence between them. Alexander's face was set in grim determination, but Isabelle could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The weight of his past hung over them like a dark cloud, threatening to tear them apart. "I will find a way," Alexander said at last, his voice low but resolute. "I won't lose you, Isabelle. Not to her, not to anyone." But Isabelle's heart was heavy with doubt. She turned away, her thoughts swirling. How could she trust him when so much had been kept from her? How could they move forward when the shadow of Lady Evelyn still loomed so large? As the wind howled outside the manor, Isabelle knew that this battle was far from over. Lady Evelyn would not give up easily, and neither would the forces that sought to claim Alexander. And as much as Isabelle wanted to believe in their love, she couldn't